The Book of Enoch is a text from the Dead Sea Scrolls that tells a story from before the Great Flood of angelic beings known as the Sons of God, or Watchers, who were sent down to guide humanity to a better future, but who rebelled against God in order to take human wives, leading to the birth of giant children known as Nephilim. These sons of God seem to only make a brief appearance in our Bibles in Genesis chapter 6, at the start of the flood narrative, but according to Jewish tradition, reality itself has been shaped by their choice to rebel against God and give humans forbidden knowledge, with many of the stories in Genesis being understood as just different metaphors for the same central conflict deep in biblical history as the sons of God in the Book of Enoch. Nowhere is this more obvious than in the Jewish Zohar, a commentary on the original 5 books of the Bible, also known as the Torah. The Zohar is claimed to be written by the famous Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai of the 2nd century AD. Despite those claims, however, the Zohar is well understood to have actually been written by the Spanish Rabbi Moses de Leon in the 13th century, over 1,000 years later. This call to an authority in the past is common with spiritual texts, which are often citing a previous source that is known to have authority, but generally you choose one from a time that these oral traditions began to arise, even if it's clear Moses de Leon is the one who arranged them together in this new unique form. The Zohar itself is a long, multi-volume text with some of the most complex commentary on a mythic text to pass down what is today called the Jewish Kabbalah, or received tradition, the cultural anecdotes and explanations that surround the Torah, some of which truly do date back to the time of the Torah's writing itself, and even beforehand, as those stories were written based off of the existing oral traditions of the community. In today's video, we will only be exploring one of the many threads that run through the Zohar, this one focusing on how the Zohar explains the unnoticed connections between the Torah stories, connecting all of them through the fallen angels. You see, even if you read the book of Genesis through, you'll notice that even though the stories are presented as a linear progression, they all actually tell a similar story to those before and after it, with each just employing a different metaphor to help explain a certain nuance of history that has now been lost. In the ancient past, before writing existed, this was how history was transmitted, with metaphors used to cover up the details that were no longer known. This led to a series of fables that, when lined up correctly, created something of a linear history to the Israelite people, but one where the characters morph from one story to the next, even if their key conflict remains the same. In the Zohar, these similarities are not just pointed out to the reader, but instead, each story becomes connected to the other by the presence of the fallen angels, who become the ultimate symbol that all of these different Bible narratives get merged into. With that in mind, let's read some key entries in the Zohar on this concept and explain the history of the fallen angels in the Bible. The story of the fallen angels in the Book of Enoch comes with many different names for their various members, from Shem-Yaza, their leader, to Azazel, who taught weapons making, and many others. However, in later tradition, these many names became a bit too lengthy to focus on, and they became easy to refer to as a whole with the name Samael, meaning venom of God or blind God in Hebrew. Samael ultimately replaces Shem-Yaza, the leader of the fallen angels in Enoch, but with a name that is less reminiscent of the patriarch Shem. Samael became a name that would later be used to represent the fallen angels as a whole, with Samael being their leader and the other angels getting lumped in with his actions. In the Book of Enoch, these angels were said to take wives from the daughters of men, leading to the birth of Nephilim, monstrous giants so big that they eat all of their own food, and then turn to start devouring the smaller humans. While Genesis itself details the sons of God taking those human wives and birthing the Nephilim, it doesn't mention the cannibalism. In the Zohar, this story from Enoch is said to actually date back all the way to the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve were tricked into eating the fruit of forbidden knowledge by the serpent. The serpent was an interesting symbol in the book of Genesis, as following that, there were no sentient animals like the serpent in the Bible, and no real mention of the serpent himself as an ongoing entity. The serpent tricking Adam and Eve into eating the fruit of forbidden knowledge was always seen as an obvious parallel to the Watchers from the Book of Enoch, giving forbidden knowledge to humans through their wives and children, which included arts and even magics that humans were not ready for. In the Zohar's commentary on the Book of Genesis, or Bereshit as it's called in the Hebrew, Samael is described as riding the serpent into the Garden of Eden. Here, the serpent just becomes a symbol used as a disguise for the fallen angel Samael in order to trick humans into taking his forbidden knowledge. This equates the fallen angels of the Book of Enoch with the serpent from the Garden of Eden, illustrating how they were just different metaphors for the same cultural conflict deep in humanity's past, where supposedly enlightened beings gave other humans knowledge that they were not ready for. You'll notice in this passage it also says that the serpent is the image of Satan, equating the serpent with who we think of as the devil in Christian tradition. In the Old Testament, Satan is famously referred to as one of the sons of God in the book of Job, where he enters heaven with the other divine beings in order to talk with God. Here, Satan is presented as an angel that goes down to the earth in order to create obstacles for humans, hence his Hebrew name Ha-Satan, translating as the adversary. His goal in Job was to prove that humans are not worthy of God's blessing by showing how seemingly righteous men like Job would denounce God if they lost their good fortunes. Thus, as the Zohar passage explains, the serpent, or Samael, is the one who entices humans to sin by misleading them in order to testify against them to the Lord, to demand punishment after forcing them to sin. But what exactly does that mean? Well, in Judaism, there's a strong belief in the gift of prophecy, with there being ways for humans to attain prophecy through rigorous self-discipline, or through meditation on the name of God from the Bible, whose pronunciation was said to be lost 2,000 years ago because it's written without vowels to help us remember. The gift of prophecy allows humans to see the future, as even though humans have free will, our lives are short enough that we will generally follow very predictable patterns across thousands of years even, if given the right influence. With the gift of prophecy, thus, you can see how your actions can affect thousands of years of future history. What the Zohar illustrates across its larger text is the idea that the Satan or Samael figure has shaped all of human history for the last 6,000 years by giving them forbidden knowledge that would prove to God that the descendants of Adam and Eve were not worthy of the blessings that God had planned for them. He is said to give humans knowledge that will be of benefit to them, but which ultimately causes them to sin against each other so that he can prove to God that they are not worthy of inheriting this world. This matches the story of the serpent in the Greek mythologies that are said to predate the writing of the Garden of Eden narrative by at least a few centuries. To the ancient Greeks examining the book of Genesis, the serpent was seen as an obvious parallel to the god Prometheus, whose name means forethought. Prometheus had the gift of prophecy, and because of that, texts like the 8th century work of Hesiod Theogony portray Prometheus as purposely giving humans forbidden knowledge against the wishes of Zeus, knowing that he and the humans would be punished for it. Prometheus himself is chained to the earth, a similar fate to the Watchers of the Book of Enoch. Prometheus, however, was said to foresee a time when Zeus would forgive Prometheus and send a savior to release him from his chains. Like with Samael in the Zohar, we have the story of a figure who is giving forbidden knowledge to humans against the wishes of a more powerful god figure. The difference here is that Prometheus is said to do this out of love for the humans, to give them a gift he knew would be worth the suffering of both himself and the humans in the deep future. According to the Zohar, however, in Bereshit A, verse 438, this set in place the events where the people of Israel in particular are set up to sin in the eyes of God, so that Samael can testify against them. The story of Samael and the fallen angels does not end here, however, and in fact, the serpent's direct influence can be seen on Adam and Eve in the very next stories that follow. In the book of Genesis, the Garden of Eden narrative transitions into the story of Cain and Abel, who were said to be the first two children of Adam and Eve in the Bible. The original story of Cain and Abel, however, was likely written without any reference to Adam and Eve being its own version of essentially the same story, that of one people in conflict with a smaller people. In the story of Cain and Abel, Cain is the farmer who goes to build the first ever city, also being the first ever architect, making him represent a much larger people. He becomes jealous, however, of his brother Abel, who is a shepherd, more in line with the people of the Jewish tradition. He represented these smaller nomadic peoples who had not developed larger civilizations due to their larger farming operations. In the book of Genesis, Cain ends up slaying Abel because he is jealous of how God sees his offerings, leading to Cain and his line being punished. Already, you can see similarities here with the story of Ha-Satan in the book of Job, who saw the humans as getting blessings that they were not worthy of and thus attacked them, with Cain here being the one jealous of Abel's blessings. Following the death of Abel, Adam and Eve come together again to have a third child, Seth, who is the ancestor of Noah and thus the Jewish people as well, and the line of Cain is indicated to be mostly wiped out by the Great Flood. Now, interesting, back in the Garden of Eden narrative, God claims that there will be enmity between the line of Eve and the line of the serpent for generations to come. But in the next chapter, we instead get enmity between the two key lines from Adam and Eve, that of Cain and Abel. It is because of this that we can see Cain and Abel as just a different metaphor for the same conflict found in the Garden of Eden, this time the serpent being represented by the patriarch of Cain, and Adam and Eve being represented by the patriarch of Abel, instead of primordial figures representing the characters such as Adam, who just means man, or the serpent, who seem to just represent a more developed faction of man deep in humanity's past. It is because of this that in the Zohar's Bereshit A 464, Cain is explained as being the child of the serpent in particular, or rather the child of Samael with Eve. With Adam and Eve just representing primordial, pre-cultural men and women, this passage explains that Samael, while riding the serpent, defiled Eve, who as part of Adam made Cain a child of both divine and human origin. Because of this, he was said to look like the angels above in the Zohar, very specifically calling them celestial angels. Just after this, due to their angelic lineage, Cain's descendants are specifically referred to as the sons of Elohim, or sons of God as we translate them in Genesis 6 and Enoch. Cain's descendants are detailed greatly in the Bible, and in fact, you could argue there are more anecdotes about them than there are about the more righteous line of Shem and his descendants. Cain's furthest descendants are credited with bringing great arts and sciences to the world, such as music and metalworking. One of Cain's descendants, Tubal-Cain, or descendant of Cain as we may translate it, even appears to parallel the teacher of metalworking in Enoch, the Watcher Azazel, which is interesting because in Genesis 6 it specifically calls the Nephilim the Gibor, or mighty men of old and renown, people who were known for legendary contributions such as those found in the line of Cain and not in the line of Shem. Interesting, among the descendants of Cain is the only woman listed in either of the genealogies, Naama, meaning pleasant or beautiful. In Jewish tradition, she is also said to contribute to the world the way her brothers did, such as through the introduction of certain arts like weaving. In the Zohar Bereshit A, however, she is explained across many different passages to be the mother of the Nephilim after leading more sons of God astray, specifically Asa and Azael. This led to another injection of the sons of God DNA into the line of Cain. In other apocryphal texts found with the Book of Enoch in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the fallen angels or Watchers are made a clear parallel to the descendants of Cain. In the Book of Jubilee, for instance, Cain is not erased entirely, but rather after his story with Abel, we don't get any information about his many descendants, with the Watchers suddenly descending instead to take over the narrative. Cain is brought up again just before the flood, where he in particular is described as dying with his house collapsing on top of him just before the flood would wipe out his descendants and the fallen angels who were said to breed with humanity. The flood narrative that starts in Genesis 6 is not the last time that the Nephilim are mentioned by name, however, and there is a network of names that refer to them found even beyond the Torah and in the greater Old Testament. In the Book of Numbers, when talking about the land of Israel after the Egyptian Exodus, it is mentioned that the descendants of the Nephilim are there, who are also known as Anakim, the sons of Anak. Anak translates meaning long-necked, and it can be argued that the serpent imagery in the Garden of Eden was inspired by these supposed giants having extra long necks. In Deuteronomy, other names are mentioned alongside the Anakim that the giants were going by in the post-Exodus era, the most important of these being the Rephaim, which can translate as shades, spirits, or, interestingly, laxed ones. In the Old Testament as a whole, these remnants of the giant races are said to have taken over some of the lines descended from Noah found in the Table of Nations, with Israel having a duty to drive them out and even exterminate some of the giants. In the Zohar, the narrative of the sons of God continue with some of these names in what we refer to as the mixed multitude. In the Bible itself, the mixed multitude is used to refer to a group that traveled with the 12 tribes of Israel out of Egypt, who are described as causing trouble for them along the way. In the Zohar, they are used as a symbol to represent the mixed multitude of giants that exist after the flood, the various tribes of Nephilim that travel the world as Israel does itself. Here, the Zohar divides the descendants of the sons of God into 5 distinct groups. The first of these is the Amalekites, who are the only ones on the list not traditionally associated with giants. The Amalekites, instead, are actually a name used for the descendants of Esau, who was the older brother of Jacob, who himself later became Israel. While Esau and his descendants are given their own blessings in the book of Genesis, their descendants, called the Amalekites, attacked the Israelites when they first left Egypt, and for this, God gave the command in the Old Testament that the memory of the Amalekites must be blotted out, and they must be erased entirely. In the Zohar, it is a new term used to refer to a specific subgroup within the descendants of giants whose destruction will bring about Israel's redemption. The second group of the mixed multitude is referred to specifically as the Nephilim, with a backstory given for their name here. Nephilim translates as fallen ones, and are named such because their ancestors were angels who were dropped from the heavens onto the earth. These Nephilim are specifically said to be the descendants of Azza and Azael, who were dropped down after complaining about how sinful humans were to see for themselves how difficult it would be to resist the temptations of the flesh. Next, the third group of the giants descended from the fallen angels are known as the Giborim, a term you may remember from earlier in our discussion from Genesis 6. Here, the Nephilim are described as the mighty men of old, mighty men here being translated as Giborim, or mighty ones. Here in the Zohar, it claims that this group is descended from the side of the Tower of Babel, or Babylon. This is interesting because in Genesis 10, the founder of Babel, Nimrod, is described as a Gibor, a mighty man before the Lord. The fourth group, according to the Zohar, is the Rephaim, who are also mentioned in the Bible as later peoples in the Canaanite region during the time following the Exodus. The Rephaim are, interestingly, known to be a real group of people that existed in the area, though their tribe has definitely died out since then. The Rephaim are presented as a group of people who worshipped their ancestors, and there are even Canaanite texts that focus on them, found alongside those like the Baal cycle. In the Zohar, the Rephaim are said to be called the lax ones in our English translations, because they were said to let go of the world that they controlled before the flood, as well as the spiritual world above after the flood. The Rephaim are described as not being allowed to see the resurrection at the end of the world because of their sins. Finally, there is the fifth group, the Anakim, which are described as being essentially the same as the Rephaim, just having their own cultural distinctions. Here it explains that the Rephaim, and by extension the Anakim, will be wiped out by God in the end times after the Israelites defeat the Amalekites themselves. The Zohar is a very unique and complex text, but hopefully with this short video, you have a small understanding of the knowledge it gives about the fallen angels and how they relate to the biblical stories. This is of course just one thread that runs through the Zohar as a whole, and even with all we've explained here, there are more dramatic secrets about the fallen angels that can only be understood through close examination of the text. For those who want to, it is already available online, and I'll link it in the description down below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for me so you don't miss more breakdowns like this. As some of you have noted in the comments, this is a very small channel and we are just starting out trying to reach more people, so any support we get in that regard will be helpful. I'm going to keep doing my best to try and get these videos out once a week, or for longer videos every 2 weeks, but the more support we get, the more money I can pay my editor to do these more frequently, as I would really like to just make a kind of definitive class that goes over every single mythology that I can get to. See you guys next time.